The sound of her husband's laughter echoed through the thin walls of their bedroom. But it wasn't the kind of laughter she had heard in years. This was different, light, carefree, the kind he used to save for her in the early days of their marriage. The kind that made her stomach twist now because she knew it wasn't meant for her. Vanessa pressed her ear against the door, her heart hammering so hard she was sure they could hear it on the other side. The wooden floor beneath her feet creaked and she froze, holding her breath. But the voices continued, oblivious to her presence. "You're so much more fun than her," came a woman's voice, high and sweet like honey. "I don't know how you stand being married to someone so boring." "Don't worry about her," David's voice replied, and Vanessa felt something cold settle in her chest. "She's always working anyway. She never pays attention to what I'm doing." The woman giggled again and Vanessa heard the bed springs creak. Her bed. The bed she had picked out when they first moved into this house 5 years ago. The bed where she had dreamed of having children with this man. The bed where she had cried herself to sleep countless nights, wondering why her husband seemed so distant. Now she knew. "When are you going to leave her?" the woman asked, and Vanessa's world tilted on its axis. "Soon," David said without hesitation. "I'm just waiting for the right time. She makes good money, you know? I need to figure out how to get my share first." Vanessa's hand flew to her mouth to stifle the gasp that threatened to escape. She had been supporting them both for the past 3 years while David found himself, and jumped from one failed business idea to another. She had worked overtime, taken on extra projects, sacrificed her own dreams so he could chase his. And all this time, he had been planning to leave her and take half of everything she had earned. "You're so smart," the woman cooed. "That's why I love you. I love you too, baby." The words hit Vanessa like a physical blow. When was the last time David had told her he loved her? When was the last time he had even looked at her with anything other than irritation or indifference? She backed away from the door slowly, her legs shaking. The hallway seemed to stretch on forever as she made her way to the living room, each step echoing in her ears like thunder. She sank onto the couch, the same couch where she and David used to watch movies together, where they used to talk about their future, where she used to believe in happy endings. The house felt different now. Every corner, every piece of furniture, every photograph on the wall seemed tainted by what she had just discovered. This wasn't her home anymore. It was a stage where she had been playing the fool while her husband and his lover laughed at her expense. Vanessa looked around the room with new eyes. The expensive artwork on the walls, she had bought that with her Christmas bonus last year. The leather furniture, paid for with her promotion money. The big screen TV that David insisted they needed, another purchase from her hard-earned salary. Even the flowers in the vase on the coffee table were wilting, just like their marriage had been wilting while she was too busy working to notice. She heard footsteps upstairs and the sound of the shower turning on. They weren't even trying to hide it anymore. How long had this been going on? How many times had this woman been in her house, in her bed, while she was at the office earning the money that kept this roof over their heads? The betrayal cut deeper than she had ever imagined possible. It wasn't just that David was cheating. It was the calculation behind it. The cold, methodical way he planned to use her and then discard her. The way he had turned their entire marriage into a lie while she worked herself to exhaustion trying to build a life for them. Vanessa stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the neighborhood she had grown to love. Mrs. Patterson next door was watering her garden, just like she did every evening. The kids across the street were playing basketball in their driveway, their shouts and laughter a stark contrast to the silence that had filled her own home for so long. This was supposed to be their life. Their neighborhood. Their future. But David had already decided their future, and it didn't include her except as a source of income until he could figure out how to leave with as much money as possible. The shower was still running upstairs. Vanessa could hear David singing, actually singing, something he never did when she was around. He was happy. He was planning to destroy her life and he was happy about it. But as she stood there, looking out at the life she had built while her husband plotted against her, something shifted inside Vanessa. The hurt was still there, sharp and raw, but underneath it, something else was growing. Something harder. Something that had been sleeping for too long. David thought she was boring. He thought she never paid attention. He thought she was just going to roll over and let him take everything she had worked for. He was about to find out how wrong he was. Vanessa didn't sleep that night. She lay in the guest bedroom, staring at the ceiling while David slept peacefully in their bed, probably dreaming about his future with his mistress. Every few minutes, she would hear him shift or mumble something in his sleep, and each sound felt like salt in an open wound. But somewhere around 3 in the morning, the hurt began to transform into something else. Something useful. She got up and went to her home office, A small room that David never entered because it was too boring with all her work files and financial documents. If only he knew what those boring documents contained. If only he realized that the woman he thought was so clueless about his activities had been keeping track of every penny that went in and out of their household for the past 8 years. Vanessa turned on her computer and opened the spreadsheet she had been maintaining since they got married. David had always made fun of her for being so organized, so meticulous about money. Live a little, he would say when she insisted on budgeting and saving. Money isn't everything. Easy words from someone who had never had to earn his own. She scrolled through years of data. Her salary deposits, carefully tracked and categorized. The mortgage payments, all from her account. The car payments, both cars purchased with her credit and her income. The credit card bills, the utilities, the insurance, the groceries, the vacations that David insisted they needed to keep the spark alive. The pattern was clear and damning. For the past 3 years since David's last job ended, she had been the sole provider. He contributed nothing financially, yet somehow managed to spend money constantly. New clothes, expensive dinners with business contacts, gym memberships, gadgets he claimed he needed for his various failed ventures. She pulled up their joint bank account and felt her stomach clench. It was nearly empty. Again. She had deposited her paycheck just 5 days ago, and somehow there was only $200 left. Where did it all go? Vanessa opened another window and logged into David's personal credit card account. She had access because she was the one who paid all the bills, but she rarely looked at the details. Now she wished she had been paying closer attention. The charges told a story that made her feel sick. Expensive restaurants she had never been to. Hotel rooms booked during hours when he claimed to be at the library working on his business plan. Jewelry purchases from stores she had never heard of. Flowers delivered to an address she didn't recognize. He had been living a double life and she had been paying for it. Vanessa leaned back in her chair, her mind racing. David thought he was so clever, planning to leave her and take half of everything. But what he didn't realize was that there was no everything to take. There were only debts. Debts that were mostly in his name, thanks to his insistence on being the man of the house, when they applied for credit cards and loans. The house was in both their names, but she had made every single mortgage payment. The cars were registered to him, but she had the loan documents proving she was the one who qualified for the financing. The credit cards he had been using to fund his affair were his responsibility, legally speaking. David had been so busy playing house with his girlfriend that he had no idea what their actual financial situation looked like. He saw Vanessa's steady paycheck and assumed that meant they were wealthy. He had no clue that his spending had been slowly draining their resources, or that most of their assets were actually liabilities. A plan began to form in Vanessa's mind. It was bold, risky, and completely unlike anything she had ever considered before. But then again, the old Vanessa would never have imagined that her husband was capable of what she had discovered tonight. She opened a new browser window and began researching. Divorce laws in their state. Asset division. Spousal support. The more she read, the clearer her path became. David wanted to leave her and take half of everything? Fine. He could have exactly half of everything, including half of the debt he had accumulated while she wasn't paying attention. The sun was starting to rise by the time Vanessa finished her research and planning. She could hear David stirring upstairs, probably getting ready for another day of pretending to look for work while actually spending time with his girlfriend. She showered quickly in the guest bathroom and got dressed for work. When she came downstairs, David was in the kitchen making coffee, humming the same song she had heard him singing in the shower the night before. "Morning, babe," he said without looking at her. "You're up early." "Couldn't sleep," Vanessa replied, keeping her voice neutral. "I'm going to grab coffee on the way to work." "Suit yourself." David shrugged and turned back to his cup. "I've got some meetings today, so I'll be out most of the afternoon." "Meetings? Right. Okay," Vanessa said. "I might be late tonight. Big project at work." "When aren't you working late?" David muttered, but he didn't sound annoyed. If anything, he sounded relieved. Vanessa grabbed her purse and headed for the door. As she reached for the handle, David called out to her. "Hey, Van?" She turned around and for a moment her heart jumped. Maybe he was going to confess. Maybe he was going to apologize and beg for forgiveness. Maybe there was still a chance to save their marriage. "Can you pick up dinner on your way home?" "I don't feel like cooking." The hope died as quickly as it had sparked. Even now, even as he was planning to leave her, he expected her to take care of him. "Sure," she said quietly. "Whatever you want." David smiled and went back to his coffee, already dismissing her from his thoughts. He had no idea that this would be one of the last normal conversations they would ever have. As Vanessa drove to work, she felt strangely calm. The hurt was still there, but it was manageable now. She had a plan. She had information David didn't know she possessed. And most importantly, she had finally stopped being the fool in her own life story. David thought she was boring and predictable. He was about to learn that still waters run deeper than he ever imagined. The law office of Helena Rodriguez was nothing like what Vanessa had expected. Instead of the intimidating mahogany and leather she had seen in movies, the space was warm and welcoming, with plants in every corner and artwork that looked like it came from local artists rather than expensive galleries. Helena herself was equally surprising. Vanessa had chosen her based on online reviews and credentials, expecting someone stern and cold. Instead, she found herself sitting across from a woman about her own age who listened with genuine empathy as Vanessa explained her situation. "I'm sorry you're going through this," Helena said when Vanessa finished her story. "Discovering infidelity is always painful, but the financial betrayal you've described makes it even worse." Vanessa nodded, grateful that someone finally understood. "I keep thinking I should have seen it sooner. The signs were all there." "Don't blame yourself for trusting your husband," Helena said firmly. "That's what marriage is supposed to be about. He's the one who violated that trust, not you." They spent the next hour going through Vanessa's financial documents. Helena's expression grew more serious as she reviewed the evidence of David's spending and the couple's actual financial situation. "This is actually more straightforward than many cases I see," Helena said finally. "Your husband has been living beyond your means, but the debt is primarily in his name. The assets you've built together are mostly paid for with your income, and you have excellent documentation to prove it." "What does that mean for the divorce?" Vanessa asked. "It means that despite what your husband might think, he's not in a position to take you for half of everything. In fact, based on what I'm seeing here, you're in a much stronger position than he realizes." Helena explained the process, the timeline, and what Vanessa could expect. It would take time, but she wouldn't be left with nothing. In fact, she might come out ahead. "There's something else," Helena said as they wrapped up the consultation. "You mentioned that your husband doesn't know you're aware of the affair. That gives us an advantage. People tend to make poor decisions when they think they're smarter than everyone else." Vanessa left the law office feeling lighter than she had in months. For the first time since discovering David's betrayal, she felt like she had some control over her situation. But she wasn't ready to file for divorce yet. She had a few more things to take care of first. Her next stop was the bank. She had been thinking about this all morning, weighing the risks and benefits. David had access to their joint accounts, but he rarely paid attention to the details. He just spent money and trusted that she would handle the rest. That trust was about to work in her favor. Vanessa opened a new checking account in her name only. She also opened a savings account and a safety deposit box. The banker, a friendly older woman named Patricia, helped her with the paperwork without asking too many questions. "Starting fresh is always exciting," Patricia said as she handed Vanessa the new account information. "Good for you." If only she knew how fresh this start was going to be. From the bank, Vanessa went to work, but she couldn't concentrate. Her mind kept wandering to David and what he was doing. Was he with his girlfriend right now? Were they making plans for their future together while she sat in meetings and pretended everything was normal? During her lunch break, Vanessa decided to take a drive past the apartment complex she had visited earlier. She was curious to see if David's financial difficulties were affecting his relationship with his girlfriend. What she saw made her smile. David's car was parked outside the complex, but he wasn't alone. Through the windshield, she could see him gesticulating wildly, clearly in the middle of an argument with someone in the passenger seat. Even from a distance, Vanessa could see the tension in his body language. She drove past slowly, careful not to be seen, and parked where she could observe from a safe distance. After about 10 minutes, a woman got out of David's car and stormed toward the apartment building. She was younger than Vanessa had expected, probably in her mid-20s, with long blonde hair and the kind of figure that suggested she spent more time at the gym than the office. David got out and followed her, clearly trying to smooth things over. But the woman kept walking, not even looking back when David called her name. This was better than Vanessa had hoped. David's money problems weren't just affecting his ability to maintain his double life, they were causing cracks in his relationship with his mistress. Vanessa drove back to work feeling lighter than she had in months. Phase 2 of her plan was working perfectly. That evening, David came home looking even more defeated than he had that morning. He barely acknowledged Vanessa's greeting, just mumbled something about needing to shower and disappeared upstairs. Over dinner, Vanessa tried to draw him into conversation, but David was clearly distracted. He kept checking his phone, frowning at messages and sighing heavily. "David, you seem really stressed," Vanessa said finally. "Is there anything I can do to help?" David looked up at her and for a moment, his mask slipped. She saw exhaustion, frustration, and something that looked almost like desperation. "It's just business stuff," he said. "Everything is more complicated than I expected." "Maybe you should take a break," Vanessa suggested. "You've been working so hard on these deals. Maybe some time away would help you think more clearly." "I can't take a break now," David said sharply. "Too much is at stake." Vanessa nodded and didn't push further. But she made a mental note of his words. Too much was at stake, including his relationship with his girlfriend, though he didn't know she knew that. That night, David disappeared into his office again, and Vanessa could hear him making increasingly desperate phone calls. She caught fragments through the door, pleas for extensions, requests for loans, explanations that got more creative with each conversation. Around midnight, she heard something that made her pause in the hallway outside his office. "I know I promised," David was saying, his voice low and strained. "But things are complicated right now. I need a little more time to get the money together." There was a long pause, presumably while the person on the other end spoke. "No, she doesn't suspect anything," David continued. "She's too busy with work to pay attention to what I'm doing. But I can't just ask her for a large sum of money without raising questions." Another pause. "Look, I want this as much as you do," David said, and Vanessa could hear the desperation creeping into his voice. "But I need to be smart about it. If I move too fast, she might get suspicious and then we'll both lose everything." Vanessa backed away from the door, her heart pounding. David was talking to his girlfriend, trying to convince her to be patient while he figured out how to leave his wife with as much money as possible. But what he didn't realize was that there was no money to take. Every financial move Vanessa had made over the past week had been designed to protect her assets and limit his access to funds. David was trying to rob a bank that had already been emptied. The next few days followed a similar pattern. David would leave early in the morning, claiming to have meetings or appointments. He would come home in the evening looking increasingly frustrated and defeated. His phone calls became more frequent and more desperate. Vanessa maintained her routine, going to work and coming home to cook dinner and pretend everything was normal. But she was also quietly continuing her preparations. She opened a new bank account at a different bank, this one solely in her name. She began redirecting her direct deposit to the new account, leaving only enough money in the joint account to cover basic household expenses. She also made appointments with her doctor, dentist, and other service providers, making sure all of her personal information was up to date and that David would have no access to her medical records or other private information. Most importantly, she met with Helena Rodriguez again to review her options. The lawyer was impressed with the documentation Vanessa had gathered and the strategic moves she had made. "You've put yourself in an excellent position," Helena said. "When you're ready to file, you'll have a strong case for keeping most of the marital assets and avoiding responsibility for his debts." "How much longer should I wait?" Vanessa asked. "That depends on what you want to accomplish," Helena replied. "From a legal standpoint, you could file anytime. But if you want to see how far his situation deteriorates first, you could wait a bit longer." Vanessa thought about it. Part of her was ready to end the charade and file for divorce immediately. But another part of her wanted to see David's carefully laid plans completely fall apart before she revealed her hand. "I'll wait a little longer," she decided. "I want to see what he does when he realizes his situation is hopeless." She didn't have to wait long to find out. The next morning, Vanessa woke up before her alarm and lay in the guest bed, listening to David get ready for another day of meetings. She could hear him humming in the shower again, that same happy tune that now made her stomach turn. When she finally got up, David was already in the kitchen, dressed nicely and checking his phone with the kind of excitement he used to reserve for special occasions. "Big day ahead?" Vanessa asked, pouring herself coffee. "Could be," David said, not looking up from his phone. "I've got that important meeting this afternoon. The one that could change everything." Vanessa nodded and finished her coffee in silence. David barely acknowledged her goodbye as she left for work, too absorbed in whatever message he was typing. At her office, Vanessa had trouble concentrating on her normal tasks. Every hour felt like an eternity. She kept checking the clock, waiting for the right time to put her plan into motion. Finally, at 2 p.m. she made her move. The first call was to their joint credit card company. Using the account information she had memorized years ago, Vanessa explained that she was concerned about some unusual spending patterns and wanted to put a temporary hold on the card for security reasons. Of course, Mrs. Johnson, the customer service representative said. We can place a temporary fraud alert on the account immediately. The card will be declined for any new purchases until you call to remove the hold. The second call was to David's personal credit card company. This one was trickier since the account was in his name, but Vanessa had been the one paying the bills for so long that she had all the verification information they needed. I'm calling about my husband's account, she explained to the representative. I've been making the payments, but I'm concerned about our ability to continue covering the balance. I wanted to discuss payment options. 20 minutes later, she had successfully arranged for David's credit limit to be reduced to just above his current balance, effectively cutting off his access to new credit. The third call was the most important one. Vanessa dialed the number for their mortgage company and asked to speak to someone about making an extra payment. I'd like to pay down the principal, she explained. I have some extra money from a bonus and I want to put it toward the house. That's wonderful, the mortgage specialist said. How much were you thinking of applying? Vanessa transferred every penny from their joint savings account, money that was mostly hers anyway, toward the mortgage principal. It wasn't enough to pay off the house completely, but it was enough to significantly reduce what they owed and establish a clear paper trail of her investment in their home. The fourth and final call was to her own credit card company, requesting an increase in her credit limit. With her excellent payment history and stable income, they approved the increase immediately. By 4 p.m., Vanessa had effectively cut off David's access to their joint funds while securing her own financial position. But she wasn't done yet. She left work early again, this time claiming a family emergency. In a way, it wasn't entirely a lie. Instead of going home, Vanessa drove to a storage facility across town. She rented a small unit and paid for 3 months in advance using cash. Then she drove to a nearby moving supply store and bought boxes, packing tape, and bubble wrap. Her next stop was an electronics store, where she purchased a small safe and a prepaid cell phone. The clerk looked at her strangely when she paid for everything in cash, but he didn't ask questions. Vanessa drove home with her supplies, her heart pounding. David's car wasn't in the driveway, which meant he was probably still at his important meeting. She had at least 2 hours before she needed to worry about him coming home. Working quickly and methodically, Vanessa began packing her most important possessions. Not everything, she didn't want David to notice that anything was missing yet. Just the things that mattered most to her. Photo albums from her childhood and college years, before she met David. Her grandmother's jewelry. Important documents like her birth certificate, passport, and college diplomas. The laptop she used for personal projects, separate from her work computer. She also packed some clothes, choosing items David wouldn't notice were gone. Basic work clothes, comfortable shoes, underwear, and sleepwear. Nothing fancy or memorable. The most important items went into the small safe, which she then packed carefully in one of the boxes. Everything else was wrapped and packed with the same attention to detail she brought to her work projects. By 6 p.m., Vanessa had filled 6 boxes with her most precious possessions. She loaded them into her car and drove to the storage unit, where she stacked them carefully in the back corner. To anyone looking in, it would just appear to be someone storing old household items. On her way home, Vanessa stopped at the grocery store and bought ingredients for David's favorite meal. She also picked up another bottle of wine and some flowers for the table. When David came home at 7:30, he found Vanessa in the kitchen, cooking and humming softly to herself. "Wow," he said, actually looking surprised. "What's the special occasion?" "No special occasion," Vanessa replied, stirring the sauce. "I just thought it would be nice to have a good dinner together." "How was your important meeting?" David's face fell slightly. "Not as good as I hoped. Some complications came up that I need to work through." Vanessa hid her smile. She had a feeling she knew exactly what complications had come up. "I'm sorry to hear that," she said. "Maybe the next one will go better." They sat down to dinner, and Vanessa found herself studying David's face as he ate. He seemed distracted, checking his phone more frequently than usual. Twice, he excused himself to take calls in the other room, returning with increasingly frustrated expressions. "Everything okay?" Vanessa asked after his second phone call. "Yeah, just some business stuff," David said, but his voice was tight. "Some minor technical issues." Vanessa nodded sympathetically and poured him another glass of wine. "I'm sure you'll figure it out. You always do." David smiled at her, and for just a moment, he looked like the man she had fallen in love with years ago. Before the lies, before the cheating, before he had decided she was nothing more than a paycheck to him. "Thanks, Van," he said. "I know I haven't been the easiest to live with lately. Things have been stressful." "I understand," Vanessa said, and she meant it. She understood far more than he realized. After dinner, David retreated to his office while Vanessa cleaned up. She could hear him on the phone, his voice getting louder and more agitated with each call. She wondered how long it would take him to figure out what had happened to his credit cards. Around 10 p.m., David emerged from his office looking defeated. "I'm going to bed," he announced. "Tomorrow's going to be a long day." "Good night," Vanessa said, not looking up from her book. "I'll be up in a bit." But Vanessa didn't go to bed. Instead, she sat in the living room listening to David toss and turn upstairs. Around midnight, she heard him get up and go to his office. She could hear him making phone calls, his voice carrying through the thin walls. "No, I don't understand why the card was declined," she heard him say. "I've been a customer for 5 years." A few minutes later, "What do you mean my credit limit was reduced? I didn't request that." And finally, in a voice that was equal parts confusion and panic, "The account is frozen? On whose authority?" Vanessa smiled and turned the page of her book. Phase 1 of her plan was complete. David was starting to realize that his carefully laid plans might not go as smoothly as he had anticipated. But this was just the beginning. Tomorrow things would get much more interesting. She stayed up until 2 a.m., listening to David make increasingly desperate phone calls. When she finally went to bed, she could hear him pacing in his office, muttering to himself. Sleep came easily to Vanessa for the first time in weeks. She dreamed of new beginnings and fresh starts, of a life where she didn't have to pretend everything was fine while her husband planned her destruction. When she woke up the next morning, David was already gone. There was no note, no goodbye, just an empty coffee cup in the sink and the lingering scent of his cologne. Vanessa smiled as she got ready for work. David probably thought he was being mysterious, disappearing early to handle his crisis. What he didn't know was that his crisis was just getting started. 3 days passed before David came home angry. Vanessa had been expecting it, but the reality was still jarring. She was in the kitchen preparing dinner when she heard his car door slam in the driveway, followed by heavy footsteps on the front porch. David burst through the front door like a storm cloud, his face red with frustration and his usually perfect hair disheveled. "We need to talk," he announced, dropping his keys on the counter with more force than necessary. "Of course," Vanessa replied calmly, continuing to chop vegetables. "How was your day?" "How was my day?" David laughed, but there was no humor in it. "My day was terrible. Everything is falling apart and I can't figure out why." Vanessa looked up from her cutting board with what she hoped was an expression of concern. "What's wrong?" "What's wrong is that all of our credit cards have been frozen or canceled," David said, starting to pace around the kitchen. "The bank says there were suspicious activity alerts, but I didn't request any alerts. And somehow our savings account is almost empty." "What?" Vanessa gasped, putting down her knife. "That's impossible. I just deposited my paycheck last week." "That's what I thought too," David said, running his hands through his hair. "But I went to the bank today and they showed me the transactions. Apparently someone made a huge payment toward the mortgage principal using our savings." "Someone made a payment on our mortgage?" Vanessa asked, as if this was the most confusing thing she had ever heard. "Who would do that?" "That's what I'm trying to figure out," David said. "The bank says the payment was authorized by someone on the account, but it wasn't me. Did you authorize it?" Vanessa frowned thoughtfully. "I don't think so. I mean, I've been so busy with work lately that I might have." "Wait, did I sign something when I was paying bills last week?" "I was rushing and sometimes I sign things automatically." It was a masterful performance and David bought it completely. His expression shifted from suspicion to exasperation. "Van, you can't just sign things without reading them," he said. "This is serious. We need that money." "I'm sorry," Vanessa said, wrapping her arms around herself as if she was upset. "I've been so stressed with everything at work. Maybe I wasn't paying attention like I should have been." David's anger softened slightly when he saw her distressed expression. This was the Vanessa he knew, the one who made mistakes and felt bad about them, the one who needed him to fix things. "It's okay," he said, though his voice was still tight. "We'll figure it out. But I need you to be more careful, especially right now. I'm trying to close some big deals and I need access to our money." "Of course," Vanessa nodded. "What can I do to help?" "Can you call the bank tomorrow and see about reversing the mortgage payment?" David asked. "Tell them it was a mistake. And see if you can get the credit cards unfrozen. I have some important expenses coming up." Important expenses. Right. Like hotel rooms and jewelry for his girlfriend. I'll call first thing in the morning, Vanessa promised. But David, maybe this is actually good news. I mean, we'll own more of the house now, right? That's like an investment. David's jaw tightened. We need liquid assets right now, not equity. I'm on the verge of some major opportunities, but I need cash to make them happen. Vanessa nodded understandingly, even as she mentally catalogued another lie. David hadn't had a legitimate business opportunity in years. Everything was about funding his double life. That night, David was restless. He spent hours on his laptop and phone, making calls and sending emails. Vanessa could hear him through the thin walls, his voice alternately pleading and demanding as he tried to solve his financial crisis. She lay in the guest bed, staring at the ceiling and listening to her husband's panic. Part of her felt guilty for causing him so much stress. But then she remembered the notebook she had found, the timeline where he planned to abandon her right after the holidays, and the guilt faded. The next morning, Vanessa made a show of calling the bank while David was in the shower. She had a long, animated conversation with the dial tone, making sure David could hear her from upstairs. I'm sorry, but the bank says the mortgage payment can't be reversed, she told David when he came downstairs. Once it's applied to the principal, it's permanent. But they said it's actually good for our credit score. David's face darkened. What about the credit cards? They're reviewing the fraud alerts, Vanessa said. It might take a few more days to get them reinstated. They want to make sure our accounts are secure. A few more days? David's voice rose. I can't wait a few more days. I have expenses that need to be paid now. What kind of expenses? Vanessa asked innocently. Maybe I can help. David hesitated, clearly trying to come up with a plausible lie. Business expenses. Meeting costs. You know, the usual stuff. Oh, Vanessa said. Well, I have my personal credit card. It's not frozen. You could use that if it's an emergency. For a moment, David looked hopeful. Then his expression fell as he realized the flaw in that plan. That card is only in your name, he said. I can't use it without you there. I could come with you, Vanessa offered. Where do you need to go? The trapped look on David's face was almost comical. He couldn't very well ask his wife to come along while he paid for hotel rooms and gifts for his mistress. No, it's okay, he said quickly. I'll figure something else out. Maybe I can get a cash advance somewhere. Vanessa nodded sympathetically. I'm sure everything will work out. It always does. David left the house that morning looking like a man carrying the weight of the world. Vanessa watched him go, feeling a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. This was the man she had loved, the man she had built a life with. But he had chosen to destroy that life for his own selfish desires. Now he was learning that actions have consequences. At work, Vanessa found it easier to concentrate than she had in weeks. Knowing that David was struggling to fund his betrayal gave her a sense of peace she hadn't felt since discovering his affair. The breaking point came on a Thursday evening in late November. Vanessa arrived home from work to find David's car in the driveway, but the house was unusually quiet. No television, no music, no sound of David talking on the phone. She found him sitting at the kitchen table, staring at a pile of papers spread out in front of him. His hair was messy as if he had been running his hands through it, and there were dark circles under his eyes. David? Vanessa said softly. Are you okay? He looked up at her with an expression she had never seen before. It was a mixture of panic, defeat, and something that looked almost like fear. We need to talk, he said, his voice hoarse. Vanessa set down her purse and sat across from him at the table. The papers in front of him appeared to be bills and bank statements, all marked with red stamps indicating overdue payments and insufficient funds. What's going on? She asked, though she had a pretty good idea. David took a deep breath, clearly struggling with how to begin. We're in trouble, Van. Serious financial trouble. What kind of trouble? The kind where we might lose the house, David said, his voice barely above a whisper. I've been trying to handle it on my own, but I can't anymore. I need your help. Vanessa looked at the papers more closely. Credit card statements showing balances that made her stomach clench. Notices from the mortgage company that she knew were fake. She had been making payments on time through her separate arrangements. Bank statements that painted a picture of financial disaster. But something was off. The numbers didn't match what she knew to be true about their actual financial situation. David had been doing his own creative accounting, probably trying to make their situation look worse than it was so he could justify whatever desperate measures he was planning. I don't understand, Vanessa said, picking up one of the credit card statements. How did things get this bad? You said your business ventures were going well. David's face flushed. They were. They are. It's just that they require more upfront investment than I anticipated. And with the economy being what it is, some of my clients have been slow to pay. More lies. Vanessa nodded as if she believed him, but she was studying his face, watching for tells. David had always been a terrible liar when he was under pressure. His left eye twitched when he was being creative with the truth, and right now it was practically fluttering. How much do we owe? She asked. David shuffled through the papers, clearly stalling. It's hard to say exactly. Between the credit cards, the mortgage, and some business loans I had to take out. David. Vanessa's voice was firm. How much? Maybe 80,000, he said quietly. Give or take. Vanessa gasped, though she knew the number was inflated. Based on her own research, their actual debt was probably closer to 40,000, most of it on David's personal credit cards. But she played her role perfectly, looking shocked and frightened. $80,000? She repeated. David, how is that possible? I've been so careful with our budget. I know, David said, reaching across the table to take her hands. It was the first time he had touched her voluntarily in months. This isn't your fault. I should have told you sooner, but I kept thinking I could fix it before you had to worry about it. What are we going to do? Vanessa asked, letting her voice tremble slightly. David squeezed her hands tighter. I have a plan. It's not ideal, but it might be our only option. Here it comes, Vanessa thought. The moment David reveals his true intentions. I've been talking to some people, David continued. There are companies that help people in our situation. They can negotiate with creditors, maybe get us a settlement for less than we owe. That wasn't what Vanessa had expected him to say. She had thought he would suggest selling the house or asking her family for money. Instead, he seemed to be proposing a legitimate solution. That sounds good, she said cautiously. What would we have to do? Well, we'd have to liquidate some assets, David said, and there was that eye twitch again. Probably sell the house, cash out your retirement accounts. Maybe take a loan against your 401k. And there it was. David wanted her to destroy her financial security to pay for debts that were mostly his responsibility. He was still trying to rob her, just in a different way than she had expected. My retirement accounts? Vanessa said, pulling her hands away from his. David, that's our future. If we cash those out, we'll have nothing for when we're older. I know it's a big sacrifice, David said quickly. But what choice do we have? If we don't do something now, we'll lose everything anyway. Vanessa stood up and began pacing around the kitchen, as if she was too agitated to sit still. In reality, she was trying to hide the anger that was building inside her. David was trying to manipulate her into giving up everything she had worked for to pay for his betrayal. There has to be another way, she said. What about bankruptcy? I know it's not ideal, but at least we keep some of our assets. David's face darkened. Bankruptcy would ruin my credit permanently. I'd never be able to get financing for future business ventures. Future business ventures. Like the venture of starting a new life with his girlfriend. But if we cash out my retirement accounts, we'd have enough to pay everything off? Vanessa asked. Probably, David said. And then we could start fresh. Start fresh. The irony was almost too much to bear. Vanessa sat back down at the table and picked up the papers again, pretending to study them carefully. I need time to think about this, she said finally. This is a huge decision. Of course, David said, but she could see the impatience in his eyes. Take all the time you need. But Van, we can't wait too long. Some of these creditors are getting aggressive. That night, Vanessa lay in the guest bed listening to David make phone calls in his office. But this time the conversation sounded different. Less desperate, more confident. As if he thought he had found the solution to all his problems. She heard him say something about getting the money together by Christmas, and finally being able to move forward with our plans. Vanessa stared at the ceiling, her mind racing. David thought he had successfully manipulated her into giving up her retirement savings to fund his escape. He probably planned to take the money, pay off just enough debt to make himself look responsible, and then leave her with whatever was left. But David had made a crucial error. He had assumed that Vanessa was still the same trusting, naive woman who had married him 8 years ago. He had no idea that she had been planning her own escape for weeks. The next morning, David was in an unusually good mood. He made coffee for both of them and even attempted small talk about her work projects. So, have you given any more thought to what we discussed last night? He asked as Vanessa was getting ready to leave for work. I'm still thinking about it, she said. It's such a big decision. I want to make sure we're doing the right thing. I understand, David said, but his smile was strained. Just remember that time is a factor here. At work, Vanessa called Helena Rodriguez and asked for an emergency meeting. They met that afternoon at a coffee shop near Vanessa's office. He wants me to cash out my retirement accounts to pay off his debts, Vanessa explained. He's making it sound like it's our only option to save the marriage. Helena's expression was grim. That's a classic financial abuse tactic. He's trying to get you to liquidate your assets so you'll have no financial independence when he leaves. That's what I thought, Vanessa said. So what do I do now? Now we file for divorce, Helena said firmly. You've given him enough rope to hang himself. It's time to cut him loose before he can do any more damage. Vanessa nodded, feeling a mixture of relief and sadness. She was ready to end this charade, but part of her still grieved for the marriage she had thought she was building. How long will it take? She asked. With the documentation you've provided and the evidence of his financial misconduct, we can move fairly quickly, Helena said. But there's something else we need to discuss. Do you want to give David a chance to negotiate, or do you want to go for everything you're entitled to? Vanessa thought about all the nights she had lain awake wondering what she had done wrong. All the times David had made her feel boring and inadequate while he was secretly planning to betray her. All the money he had spent on his girlfriend while expecting her to sacrifice her future for his debts. I want everything I'm entitled to, she said firmly. David made his choice. Now he gets to live with the consequences. Helena smiled approvingly. Good. Then let's make sure he gets exactly what he deserves. They spent the next hour planning Vanessa's next moves. By the time she left the coffee shop, she had a clear timeline and strategy. In 1 week, David's world was going to come crashing down around him. But this time, Vanessa wouldn't be there to pick up the pieces. The following Monday morning, Vanessa woke up with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. Today was the day she would finally stop being a victim in her own life story. David was still asleep when she got up, which wasn't unusual. He had been staying up later and later, making phone calls and working on what he called his financial recovery plan. Vanessa knew it was actually his escape plan, but she no longer cared what David was planning. She had her own plans now. She dressed carefully for work, choosing a navy blue suit that made her feel confident and professional. She had meetings scheduled throughout the day, but the most important appointment wasn't on her work calendar. At lunchtime, Vanessa met Helena Rodriguez at the courthouse. They filed the divorce papers together, and Helena walked her through what would happen next. David will be served with papers tomorrow morning, Helena explained. He'll have 30 days to respond, but given what you've told me about his financial situation, I suspect he'll want to settle quickly. What if he doesn't? Vanessa asked. Then we go to court, and with the evidence you've gathered, you'll get everything you're asking for and probably more, Helena said confidently. But most people prefer to negotiate when they realize how weak their position is. Vanessa nodded, feeling a mixture of nervousness and excitement. After weeks of planning and preparation, things were finally in motion. That evening, she cooked David's favorite meal again, just like she had been doing for weeks. But tonight felt different. Tonight was their last dinner as husband and wife, though David didn't know it yet. You seem cheerful tonight, David observed as they sat down to eat. Good day at work? Very good, Vanessa said, and she meant it. I feel like I'm finally taking control of things that have been bothering me. David smiled, completely missing the deeper meaning of her words. That's great, babe. I'm proud of you for staying positive during all this stress. They ate in comfortable silence for a while, and Vanessa found herself studying David's face. She tried to remember when she had first fallen in love with him, but those memories felt like they belonged to someone else. The man sitting across from her was a stranger who happened to share a name with her husband. So, David said, pushing his empty plate away, have you made a decision about the retirement accounts? Here it was. The moment David had been building toward for days. I've been thinking about it, Vanessa said carefully. But I have some questions first. Of course. What do you want to know? Well, I've been looking at our situation more carefully, Vanessa said, pulling out a folder she had prepared. And some things don't add up. David's expression immediately became guarded. What do you mean? I mean that according to my records, we don't own nearly as much as you said we do, Vanessa replied, opening the folder. I've been tracking our expenses and payments, and the numbers you showed me don't match what I have in my files. The color drained from David's face. What records are you talking about? The ones I've been keeping since we got married, Vanessa said, spreading documents across the table. Bank statements, credit card bills, payment confirmations. Everything. David stared at the papers as if they were written in a foreign language. Van, you don't understand. There are other debts you don't know about. Business loans, private arrangements. You mean like the money you've been spending on hotel rooms and jewelry? Vanessa asked quietly. The silence that followed was deafening. David's mouth opened and closed several times, but no words came out. Finally he managed to whisper, "How did you?" "I know about her, David," Vanessa said, her voice surprisingly steady. "I know about the apartment, the gifts, the credit cards you've maxed out trying to impress her. I know about your plan to leave me after Christmas. I know about everything." David's face went through a series of expressions: shock, panic, calculation, and finally resignation. When he spoke, his voice was barely audible. "How long have you known?" "Long enough," Vanessa replied. "Long enough to realize that our marriage has been over for a while. Long enough to understand that you never intended to work through our problems. Long enough to protect myself from whatever you were planning to do to me." David leaned back in his chair, running his hands through his hair. "Van, I can explain." "You don't need to explain anything," Vanessa said, standing up from the table. "You made your choice. Now I'm making mine." She walked to the kitchen counter and picked up an envelope she had placed there earlier. She set it down in front of David, who stared at it as if it might explode. "What is this?" he asked. "Your copy of the divorce papers," Vanessa said. "I filed this afternoon. You'll be officially served tomorrow, but I thought you should have a heads up." David tore open the envelope with shaking hands. As he read the documents, his face grew paler and paler. "Van, you can't be serious," he said finally. "We can work this out. We can go to counseling, start over." "Start over?" Vanessa laughed, but there was no humor in it. "David, you've been planning to leave me for months. You've been stealing money from our joint accounts to fund your affair. You tried to trick me into cashing out my retirement savings to pay for debts that are mostly yours. What exactly would we be starting over from?" David stood up abruptly, the papers scattering to the floor. "This is insane. You're throwing away 8 years of marriage over a mistake." "A mistake." Vanessa's voice rose for the first time. "Which part was the mistake, David? Cheating on me? Lying to me? Planning to abandon me? Trying to steal my retirement money? Or is the mistake that you got caught?" "It's not what you think," David said desperately. "Yes, I made some bad choices, but I never stopped loving you. We can fix this." "No, we can't," Vanessa said firmly. "Because I don't love you anymore. I'm not even sure I like the person you've become." The words hung in the air between them like a wall. David stared at her as if she had just spoken in a foreign language. "You don't mean that," he said quietly. "I do mean it," Vanessa replied. "I've spent months wondering what I did wrong, why I wasn't enough for you. But the truth is, this isn't about me. This is about who you are. And who you are is someone who lies to the person who loves him, who steals from the person who supports him, and who plans to destroy someone's life for his own benefit." David sank back into his chair, the fight going out of him. "So what happens now?" "Now you find somewhere else to sleep tonight," Vanessa said. "The locks will be changed tomorrow. Your clothes and personal items will be packed and ready for pickup by the end of the week." "Van, be reasonable. I don't have anywhere to go." "You have your girlfriend," Vanessa pointed out. "I'm sure she'll be happy to have you full-time now that you're finally free." David's expression darkened. "It's not that simple." "Why not? Isn't this what you wanted?" David didn't answer, but Vanessa could see the truth in his face. His relationship with his girlfriend had been built on the fantasy of David as a successful businessman who was going to leave his boring wife with a substantial settlement. The reality of David as a financially ruined man with nothing to offer was probably less appealing. "She doesn't know about the money problems, does she?" Vanessa asked, suddenly understanding. "You told her you were wealthy. You made her think you were going to leave me with a big payout and start fresh with her." The look on David's face told her she was right. "So what happens when she finds out you're broke?" Vanessa continued. "What happens when she realizes that instead of being a rich divorcee, you're going to be paying me spousal support?" "Spousal support?" David looked confused. "Did you not read the papers?" Vanessa asked. "I'm asking for temporary spousal support while you get back on your feet. After all, I'll need time to adjust to being single again after supporting both of us for so long." David grabbed the scattered papers from the floor and read them more carefully. With each page, his expression grew more stricken. "You can't do this," he said finally. "Half the house, spousal support, keeping your retirement accounts. You're trying to ruin me." "I'm not trying to ruin you, David," Vanessa said calmly. I'm just making sure I don't end up ruined by you. Everything I'm asking for is fair based on what I contributed to this marriage. Fair? David's voice cracked. How is any of this fair? You want to know what's fair? Vanessa asked, her composure finally slipping. Fair would be you having to pay back every penny you spent on your girlfriend. Fair would be you losing your credit and your reputation the way you planned to destroy mine. Fair would be everyone knowing what kind of man you really are. David stared at her and for the first time seemed to really see her. Not the boring, predictable wife he had taken for granted, but the intelligent, capable woman who had been supporting him and planning her own survival while he plotted against her. I never wanted to hurt you, he said quietly. But you did hurt me, Vanessa replied. And you would have hurt me much worse if I hadn't found out about your plans. The difference is I'm not going to let that happen. David picked up the divorce papers again, reading through them one more time. If I contest this, then we go to court, and I present all the evidence I've gathered about your financial misconduct and adultery, Vanessa said. Your choice. David looked at the documents, then at Vanessa, then back at the documents. Finally, he set them down on the table and stood up. I'll need some time to figure out where I'm going to stay, he said. You have until midnight, Vanessa replied. After that, the locks change and you'll need to make an appointment to get your things. David nodded slowly and walked toward the stairs. Halfway up he turned back. For what it's worth, he said, I really did love you once. I know, Vanessa said sadly. But love isn't enough when it's not accompanied by respect and honesty. And you stopped respecting me a long time ago. David disappeared upstairs and Vanessa heard him moving around in their bedroom packing his things. She sat at the kitchen table, looking at the scattered divorce papers and the remains of their last dinner together. She had expected to feel triumphant or vindicated. Instead she felt tired and sad. Not sad for David, he had made his choices and would live with the consequences. But sad for the woman she had been, who had tried so hard to save a marriage that was already over. An hour later, David came downstairs with 2 suitcases and a garbage bag full of clothes. He looked older somehow, as if the events of the evening had aged him years in a matter of hours. I'll call you about picking up the rest of my stuff, he said. Call Helena, Vanessa replied, handing him one of the lawyer's business cards. All communication needs to go through her now. David took the card and looked at it for a long moment. I guess this is it then. Yes, Vanessa said. This is it. David walked to the front door, then paused with his hand on the knob. I hope you'll be happy, Van. I really do. I will be, Vanessa said, and for the first time in months she believed it. After David left, Vanessa locked the door behind him and set the chain. Then she walked through the house, turning off lights and checking windows. For the first time in years, the house felt like it belonged to her. She went to bed early, sleeping in the master bedroom for the first time since discovering David's affair. The sheets smelled like his cologne, so she stripped the bed and put on fresh linens. As she lay in the dark, Vanessa thought about what came next. There would be legal proceedings, financial arrangements to finalize, and the challenge of rebuilding her life as a single woman. But for the first time in months, the future felt full of possibilities instead of dread. She had taken control of her story, and tomorrow she would start writing a new chapter. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of legal meetings, paperwork, and the strange process of untangling a shared life. David had found a temporary place to stay. Vanessa suspected it was with his girlfriend, though she didn't ask and didn't care. He had tried to negotiate through Helena, asking for more time to find permanent housing and a more favorable division of assets. But Helena had been firm. The terms Vanessa had proposed were generous given David's misconduct, and if he wanted to contest them, they could settle the matter in court. David, apparently after consulting with his own lawyer, had decided not to contest the divorce. He signed everything, Helena told Vanessa during their final meeting. The house is yours, along with your retirement accounts and most of the liquid assets. He'll be responsible for his credit card debts, and you'll receive spousal support for 2 years or until you remarry, whichever comes first. What about his business debts? Vanessa asked. Since they were incurred without your knowledge or consent, and you can prove you received no benefit from them, he's solely responsible, Helena explained. You're completely protected. Vanessa felt a weight lift from her shoulders. For the first time in months she could think about the future without fear. There is one more thing, Helena said, sliding an envelope across the table. David asked me to give this to you. Vanessa looked at the envelope suspiciously. What is it? I don't know. He said it was personal. Vanessa took the envelope but didn't open it. Whatever David had to say to her, she wasn't sure she wanted to hear it. That evening, Vanessa sat in her living room now, looking at the envelope. Finally, curiosity got the better of her and she opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper with David's handwriting. Van, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I needed to say this. You were right about everything. I did stop respecting you and I took advantage of your trust and your love. I convinced myself that you were boring and predictable because it made it easier to justify what I was doing. But the truth is, you were the best thing in my life, and I threw it away for someone who didn't even want me once she found out I was broke. I'm not asking for forgiveness or another chance. I just wanted you to know that I realize what I lost. I hope you find someone who appreciates what I was too stupid to see. David. Vanessa read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and put it back in the envelope. It was a good apology, honest, taking responsibility, not asking for anything in return. But it was also too little, too late. She thought about the woman she had been 6 months ago, before she discovered David's betrayal. That woman might have been moved by this letter. She might have seen it as a sign that David had changed, that maybe there was still hope for their marriage. But Vanessa wasn't that woman anymore. She had learned to trust herself, to value herself, to fight for herself. And she had learned that love without respect and honesty wasn't really love at all. She put the letter in a drawer and didn't think about it again. December arrived with an early snowfall that covered the neighborhood in pristine white. Vanessa found herself enjoying the quiet rhythm of her new life. She worked during the day, came home to a house that stayed exactly as she left it, and spent her evenings reading, cooking for herself, or video calling with friends she had neglected during the worst days of her marriage. She was surprised to discover that she wasn't lonely. If anything, she felt more connected to herself than she had in years. She remembered hobbies she had abandoned, dreams she had set aside, parts of her personality that had been buried under the stress of trying to save a failing marriage. One evening in mid-December, Vanessa was decorating a small Christmas tree when her doorbell rang. Through the peephole, she saw a woman she didn't recognize, young, blonde, exactly matching the description of David's girlfriend. Vanessa opened the door but left the chain on. "Can I help you?" "Are you Vanessa?" the woman asked. Her eyes were red as if she had been crying. "Yes. And you are?" "I'm Sarah. I was seeing your husband." Vanessa looked at her for a long moment, then closed the door, removed the chain and opened it again. "Come in. It's cold out there." Sarah stepped into the entryway, looking around nervously. "I probably shouldn't be here." "Probably not," Vanessa agreed. "But you're here anyway. So what do you want?" Sarah wrapped her arms around herself. "I wanted to apologize. And I wanted to ask you something." "Apologize for what?" "You didn't owe me anything." "I knew he was married," Sarah said quietly. "He told me you two were separated, that you were just waiting for the divorce to be final. But I knew he was lying. I just didn't care because I thought." She trailed off. "You thought he had money?" Vanessa finished. Sarah's face flushed. "That makes me sound terrible." "It makes you sound human," Vanessa said. "People make decisions based on what they think will benefit them. David certainly did." They stood in awkward silence for a moment. Finally, Sarah spoke again. "He told me you were the reason he couldn't leave. He said you were controlling and manipulative, that you threatened to take everything if he tried to divorce you." Vanessa laughed, but there was no bitterness in it. "And now you know the truth." "Now I know he's broke and probably going to be paying you support for the next 2 years, Sarah said. "And I know he lied about everything else, so he probably lied about you too." "What did you want to ask me?" Sarah took a deep breath. "I wanted to ask if you really didn't know. About us, I mean. Because if you did know and you were just waiting." "I didn't know until I caught you in my bedroom," Vanessa said. "And I wasn't waiting to destroy David. I was trying to save my marriage up until the moment I realized it wasn't worth saving." Sarah nodded, looking relieved. "I'm sorry," she said again. "For all of it. I know that doesn't mean much, but I needed to say it." "It means something," Vanessa said. "And for what it's worth, David would have cheated on me with someone eventually. If it hadn't been you, it would have been someone else." Sarah looked surprised. "You don't hate me?" "I don't have the energy to hate you," Vanessa replied honestly. "My anger is reserved for my husband, who made vows to me and broke them. You didn't make me any promises." Sarah wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I broke up with him, you know, after I found out about the money and the lies. He begged me to give him another chance, said he could still get money from the divorce, but I was done with his lies." "Good for you," Vanessa said, and she meant it. "You deserve better than someone who lies to everyone in his life." Sarah looked around the house again, taking in the warm decorations and the obvious signs of a woman building a new life for herself. "You seem like you're doing okay," she said. "I am," Vanessa replied. "Better than okay, actually. I'm discovering who I am when I'm not trying to save someone else." After Sarah left, Vanessa stood in her doorway for a moment, watching the young woman walk to her car through the falling snow. She felt an unexpected sense of closure. Sarah wasn't the villain in this story, she was just another person who had been deceived by David's lies. The real villain was David himself, and he was already facing the consequences of his choices. Christmas came and went quietly. Vanessa spent the holiday with her sister and her family, enjoying the chaos of children opening presents and the warmth of being surrounded by people who genuinely cared about her well-being. "You look different," her sister Linda observed as they cleaned up wrapping paper on Christmas evening. "Happier. More like yourself." "I feel more like myself," Vanessa admitted. "I didn't realize how much energy I was spending trying to fix something that couldn't be fixed." "Any regrets?" Linda asked. Vanessa thought about it. "I regret that it took me so long to see what was really happening. But I don't regret the divorce. David showed me who he really was and I finally believed him." In the new year, Vanessa threw herself into rebuilding her life with the same systematic approach she brought to everything else. She joined a gym and rediscovered how much she enjoyed physical challenges. She signed up for a cooking class and learned to make dishes that David had always claimed to dislike. She bought new furniture for the house, replacing pieces that reminded her of their life together with things that reflected her own taste. She also focused on her career with renewed energy. Without the constant stress of her failing marriage, she found herself more creative and productive at work. Her supervisor noticed the change and hinted at a promotion that would come with a significant salary increase. But the most surprising change was in her social life. Without David's subtle discouragement, Vanessa reconnected with old friends and made new ones. She joined a book club, started volunteering at a local animal shelter, and even tried online dating, though she wasn't in any hurry to find a serious relationship. "I'm learning to enjoy my own company," she told Helena during their final legal meeting in February. "I spent so many years defining myself through my marriage that I forgot I was a complete person on my own." "That's one of the best outcomes I see in these cases," Helena said. "You've not just survived your divorce, you've thrived." The divorce was finalized on a cold Tuesday in March. Vanessa signed the final papers in Helena's office, officially ending her 8-year marriage. She expected to feel sad or nostalgic, but instead she felt relieved and optimistic about the future. As she was leaving the law office, her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Congratulations on your freedom. You deserve all the happiness in the world. Sarah." Vanessa smiled and typed back, "Thank you. I hope you find your happiness too." It was a small gesture, but it felt like the final page of a chapter she was ready to close. Spring arrived early that year, and Vanessa spent her weekends working in the garden, planting flowers and vegetables that she had always wanted to grow but David had claimed were too much work. She found the physical labor meditative, and she loved watching things grow under her care. One Saturday in April, she was kneeling in her flower bed when she heard a car door slam in the driveway next door. Mrs. Patterson, her elderly neighbor, was trying to carry several heavy grocery bags from her car to her front door. "Let me help you with those," Vanessa called out, abandoning her gardening to assist. "Oh, thank you, dear," Mrs. Patterson said gratefully. "These old bones aren't what they used to be." As they carried the bags inside, Mrs. Patterson invited Vanessa to stay for tea. They sat in the older woman's kitchen, surrounded by decades of family photos and mementos. "I have to say, you seem much happier these days," Mrs. Patterson observed, pouring hot water into delicate china cups. "I know it's none of my business, but I was worried about you for a while there." "Worried about me?" Vanessa was surprised. "Well, you always seemed so tired when you came home from work. And that husband of yours." Mrs. Patterson paused diplomatically. "Let's just say I noticed he didn't seem to appreciate what he had." Vanessa smiled. "You're very observant, Mrs. Patterson. When you've lived as long as I have, you learn to read people," the older woman said. "And I could see that you were carrying a heavy burden. I'm glad you found a way to put it down." They talked for over an hour, and Vanessa discovered that her neighbor was a retired teacher with fascinating stories about decades in the classroom. As she walked back to her own house, Vanessa realized that this was another benefit of her new life, the time and energy to form genuine connections with the people around her. That evening, as she was preparing dinner for one, Vanessa's phone rang. The caller ID showed David's name, and she hesitated before answering. "Hello, David." "Hi, Van. His voice sounded tired. "I hope I'm not bothering you." "What do you need?" she asked, keeping her tone neutral. "I just wanted to let you know that I'm moving to Arizona next month. I got a job there, a fresh start." "That's good. I hope it works out for you." There was a long pause. "I also wanted to thank you." "Thank me for what?" "For handling the divorce the way you did. I know I didn't deserve your consideration, but you could have made things much worse for me than you did." Vanessa thought about that. It was true, she could have pursued more aggressive legal action, could have tried to leave David with nothing. But she had chosen to be fair rather than vindictive. "I'm not a cruel person, David," she said. "Even when I'm angry, I don't want to destroy people." "I know that now," David said quietly. "I should have known it then." "Yes, you should have." Another pause. Are you happy, Van?" The question surprised her with its sincerity. "Yes," she said after a moment. "I really am. Are you?" "I'm trying to be," David replied. "I'm learning a lot about myself and most of it isn't pretty. But I'm working on it." "That's all anyone can do," Vanessa said. "Well, I should let you go. Take care of yourself, Van." "You too, David." After she hung up, Vanessa sat at her kitchen table, looking out at her garden where the first spring flowers were beginning to bloom. She felt a sense of completion, as if a circle had finally been closed. David was moving away, starting over in a new place. In a way, they were both doing the same thing, learning to build new lives from the wreckage of their marriage. The difference was that Vanessa was building her new life from a foundation of self-respect and truth, while David was still dealing with the consequences of his deception and betrayal. But that wasn't her problem anymore. Vanessa finished preparing her dinner and ate it on her back porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. Tomorrow she would work in her garden again, maybe call her sister, perhaps meet friends for brunch on Sunday. For the first time in years, the future stretched ahead of her like an open road, full of possibilities she was free to explore at her own pace and on her own terms. 1 year after her divorce was finalized, Vanessa stood in her backyard surveying the garden she had created. The flower beds were bursting with color, the vegetable patch was producing more tomatoes and peppers than she could eat, and the small herb garden by the kitchen door filled the air with the scent of basil and rosemary. It was hard to believe how much had changed in such a short time. The promotion at work had come through 6 months ago, along with a substantial salary increase that made her more financially secure than she had ever been during her marriage. She had used part of the extra money to renovate her kitchen, replacing David's expensive gadgets with tools she actually used and creating a space that felt warm and welcoming. She had also started dating again, though she was in no hurry to remarry. There was Michael, the veterinarian she had met at the animal shelter where she volunteered. He was kind and funny and shared her love of hiking. There was also James from her book club, who wrote poetry and made her laugh with his observations about terrible romance novels. Neither relationship was serious yet, and Vanessa was content with that. She was learning to enjoy the process of getting to know people without the pressure of immediately determining whether they were the one. For the first time in her adult life, she was dating for fun rather than frantically searching for someone to complete her. "You look different," her sister Linda had observed during their last phone call. "Your voice sounds different too. Lighter." "I feel lighter," Vanessa had replied. "I didn't realize how much energy I was spending on anger and hurt. Once I let that go, I had so much more space for other things." The anger hadn't disappeared overnight. 4 months after the divorce, Vanessa had caught herself fantasizing about David facing various forms of karmic justice. But gradually, those thoughts had faded, replaced by genuine indifference to whatever was happening in her ex-husband's life. She had heard through mutual acquaintances that David was struggling in Arizona. The job he had moved for hadn't worked out as expected, and he was having trouble making ends meet on his salary while paying spousal support. Part of Vanessa felt bad for him, but it was the same distant sympathy she might feel for any stranger facing difficulties. David's problems were no longer her problems to solve. On a warm Saturday evening in late summer, Vanessa was hosting her first dinner party in the renovated kitchen. Her book club had decided to meet at her house, and she had prepared a feast of dishes she had learned to make in her cooking classes. "This house feels completely different than it did when you were married," said Janet, one of the original members of the book club who had known Vanessa during her marriage. "It feels like you now." "What do you mean?" asked another member who had joined more recently. "When David lived here, everything felt careful," Janet explained. "Like Vanessa was always worried about doing something wrong. Now the house feels relaxed and happy." Vanessa smiled as she served dessert. "I spent so many years trying to create the perfect home for someone who didn't appreciate it. Now I'm creating a home that makes me happy, and somehow that works better for everyone. After her guests left, Vanessa cleaned up the kitchen and reflected on Janet's observation. It was true, the house did feel different now. But more than that, she felt different. The woman who had desperately tried to save her marriage by becoming smaller and more accommodating was gone, replaced by someone who knew her own worth and refused to accept less than she deserved. That night, as she was getting ready for bed, Vanessa's phone buzzed with a text from Michael. Had a great time hiking with you today. Want to try that new restaurant downtown next weekend? She texted back, I'd love to. Pick me up at 7? A year ago, Vanessa would have spent 20 minutes crafting that response, analyzing every word for hidden meanings and potential ways it could be misinterpreted. Now she simply said what she meant and trusted that if Michael didn't like her straightforward communication style, he wasn't the right person for her anyway. As she turned off the lights and headed upstairs, Vanessa caught sight of herself in the hallway mirror. The woman looking back at her had the same face she had always had, but there was something different in her eyes. Confidence maybe. Or peace. Or simply the contentment that comes from finally being comfortable in your own skin. She thought about the woman she had been 2 years ago, anxious, exhausted, constantly trying to fix a marriage that was already broken. That woman would be amazed to see where life had led her. Not just the material changes, though those were significant. The house that was truly hers now, the career that was flourishing, the financial security she had built through her own efforts. But the real transformation was internal. Vanessa had learned to trust herself, to value her own judgment, to set boundaries and stick to them. She had discovered that she was more resilient than she had ever imagined, more capable of independence than she had been taught to believe. Most importantly, she had learned that real love, didn't require her to diminish herself. The right person would appreciate her strength, not try to weaken it. They would celebrate her successes, not undermine them. They would be honest with her, even when the truth was difficult. As she settled into bed, Vanessa thought about the future with excitement rather than anxiety. There were so many possibilities ahead of her. Travel she wanted to do, hobbies she wanted to explore, relationships she wanted to build. Maybe she would marry again someday, but if she didn't, that would be fine too. She was complete on her own. Her phone buzzed one more time with a goodnight text from Michael, and she smiled as she responded. Then she set the phone aside and closed her eyes, comfortable in the knowledge that whatever tomorrow brought, she was ready for it. Outside her window, the garden she had planted and tended rustled softly in the evening breeze. In the darkness, new buds were forming that would bloom in the days to come, just as new chapters of her life were waiting to unfold. Vanessa fell asleep peacefully, no longer the woman who had been betrayed and discarded, but the woman who had risen from that betrayal stronger and wiser than before. She had taken control of her own story, and the ending she was writing for herself was better than any fairy tale. In her dreams, she was running through a field of wildflowers, her face turned toward the sun, finally free to become whoever she wanted to be. And when she woke the next morning, that dream felt like a promise of all the good things yet to come. The woman who had once caught her husband with his mistress and woke up to find her world destroyed had rebuilt that world into something better than she had ever imagined possible. She had learned that sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all, it's living so well that the person who wronged you becomes irrelevant to your happiness. And Vanessa was very, very happy. The E&D break, she drove past the address she had found in David's credit card statements. It was a small apartment complex about 20 minutes from their house. Nothing fancy but new and clean. She wondered if this was where his girlfriend lived, or if it was some kind of love nest David was paying for. The thought made her stomach turn, but it also strengthened her resolve. David was not only cheating on her emotionally and physically, he was stealing from her to fund his betrayal. That afternoon, Vanessa did something she had never done before. She left work early, claiming she had a doctor's appointment. Instead, she went home, knowing that David would probably be out at one of his meetings. The house was empty, just as she had expected. Vanessa went straight to David's home office, a space he had claimed when they first moved in but rarely used. It was mostly just storage for his old college textbooks and the remnants of his various failed business ventures. But today she was looking for something specific. She remembered seeing a small filing cabinet in the corner, locked and forgotten. David had the key on his keychain, but Vanessa had always been good at solving problems. It took her 15 minutes to pick the simple lock using a paperclip and a hairpin, skills she had learned from a YouTube video during a particularly boring weekend. She felt a little thrill of satisfaction when the lock clicked open. Inside the cabinet, she found exactly what she was looking for. And more. There were printed emails between David and his girlfriend, going back almost a year. Love letters that made Vanessa's skin crawl with their intimacy and casual cruelty toward her. Financial documents showing that David had been slowly moving money around, preparing for what he clearly saw as his inevitable departure. And most damning of all, a notebook where David had been calculating what he thought he could get in a divorce settlement. According to his notes, David believed their house was worth more than it actually was, that their savings were substantial, and that he was entitled to alimony since Vanessa had been the primary breadwinner. He had even researched lawyers, though apparently he had never actually contacted any of them. The final page of the notebook contained a timeline. David was planning to leave her in 3 months, right after the holidays. He wanted to get through Christmas and New Year's first, probably so she would pay for his holiday spending and any gifts he planned to give his girlfriend. Vanessa photographed every page with her phone, her hands steady despite the rage building inside her. David had turned their entire marriage into a business transaction, calculating every move for maximum benefit to himself. But he had made one crucial error in his calculations. He had based everything on assumptions, not facts. He had no idea what their actual financial situation looked like because he had never bothered to pay attention to the details. He just trusted that Vanessa would handle everything while he did whatever he wanted. That trust had been his downfall, though he didn't know it yet. Vanessa locked the cabinet and left everything exactly as she had found it. Then she went back to work, telling her supervisor that her doctor's appointment had been shorter than expected. She spent the rest of the afternoon in a strange state of calm focus. She answered emails, attended meetings, and worked on her current projects as if nothing had changed. But underneath the surface, her mind was racing with plans and possibilities. David thought he was 3 months away from his freedom. He had no idea that his freedom was about to cost him everything he thought he was going to gain. That evening, Vanessa stopped at David's favorite restaurant and picked up dinner, just as she had promised. She even bought a bottle of wine to go with it. When she got home, David was waiting in the living room, freshly showered and in a surprisingly good mood. "Smells great," he said, kissing her cheek briefly. "Thanks for picking this up. I know you've been working hard lately." "No problem," Vanessa replied, setting the food on the dining room table. "We should eat it while it's hot." They sat down together, and for a moment, Vanessa was struck by how normal it all seemed. If she didn't know what she knew, this could have been just another quiet evening at home with her husband. But she did know. And that knowledge changed everything. "So how were your meetings today?" she asked, pouring wine for both of them. David's face lit up in a way that would have warmed her heart just 24 hours ago. Now it made her feel sick. "Really good, actually. I think I'm finally onto something with this new venture. It might mean some late nights and weekend work, but I think it's going to pay off big." "That's wonderful," Vanessa said, raising her glass. "Here's to new beginnings." David clinked his glass against hers, completely missing the edge in her voice. "To new beginnings," he agreed. They ate in comfortable silence, David scrolling through his phone while Vanessa watched him and planned his downfall. Tomorrow she would start putting her plan into action. Tonight, she would let him enjoy his last peaceful evening as her husband. Because after tomorrow, David's world was going to start falling apart, and he would have no one to blame but himself.